So I want to first of all welcome back our members and our community who has come to our events in the past, and I want to welcome for the first time a lot of new faces, and thank you all the students in the room. You are the primary audience of what we do here, so it's always wonderful to have you here and engaged and curious, and during the question and answer period, we'd love to have your hands shoot up. Don't worry, none of us know more than you know, so don't feel like you're going to ask a question that everyone else already knows the answer to. We don't, so please ask it. I'd like to start off by, first of all, thanking the sponsors of this lecture series, which is the B.B. and Owen Bernstein Lecture Series. They sponsor 3 lecture events every semester, and they're always really phenomenal events, and we really appreciate their support and their patronage. I also want to thank Queensborough Community College, which is our home, and our president, Dr. Diane Call. We have a couple members of the center's advisory board here, although now I'm feeling like there's actually just one, but I want to acknowledge Hannah Liebman, who is here with us in the front row. Some of you have had the distinct, thank you. Some of you have had the distinct pleasure of hearing her speak about her experiences, and I know one of you had the opportunity to interview her as part of one of our fellowships a couple years ago. So it's a really wonderful that you could be here tonight. Thank you. We also, of course, always like to thank our New York City Council members and State Assembly members who support all the work we do and helped us build this building and help us do our exhibits. This event, well, before I get to this event, I want to say a couple more things. Sorry, Mary. We have a calendar of events. It looks like this. They're in the back for anyone who would like to come to other events. Please just grab one, take a look at the kind of things we do. We do film screenings. I'm going to lead with that. They're wonderful. They're generally not that many people, so you can sort of spread out. They're in our classroom, and we have a discussion afterwards. They're always really interesting events. And we have our lectures and our panel discussions, so please do take a look at that. The other thing I want to mention to you is that every year for the past 12 or 13 years, we host what we call our Holocaust Freedom Seder. And for those of you who don't know, Seder is a ceremonial meal that Jews eat to celebrate Passover, which is a reminder of the historical exodus of the Jews from Egypt, which it's also a biblical story, but the way we mark it is with a book that takes us through the event that was actually produced in 1946, directly after the Holocaust, and it was first used in a displaced persons camp in Germany, in Munich, in fact, a town that features prominently in this exhibit, where Holocaust survivors were celebrating their first Seder after their liberation from the camps. So it's a very wonderful opportunity to come and learn from the Holocaust survivors who attend and about their experience. It's on a Sunday. Students are free. And it's an opportunity to really get to sit down with Holocaust survivors in a different kind of a way. They're not on the stage speaking to you. They're sitting at a table with you and you're having a meal. And we have musicians and we have a rabbi, but it's not done in any kind of really a religious way. We're really walking through and commemorating this amazing historical moment which marked an experience of Jewish survivors of the Holocaust who are finally free from their suffering in these concentration camps, who are marking the Jewish historical moment of celebrating Jewish freedom from slavery and captivity. So there's this, it's 2 histories we're dealing with that layer themselves right on top of each other. And for us to be there to support the survivors and to engage as a community, it's really a wonderful event. So we have sign-up information in the back. We have flyers. For community members, there is a charge, which almost covers the cost of the food. But students are always free and encouraged to come. So please take a look at that. Excuse me. So we come now to the event of the night, or to tonight's event, which is really part of our series of events exploring the issues raised by the exhibit that we have on display right now. I think some of you know this exhibit or some of the content, but I think that Mary might introduce it a bit in her talk. But in brief, about a year and a half ago, the center was gifted a concentration camp uniform from a Holocaust survivor who was born in Lithuania, was in a concentration camp in Germany, and then ultimately moved to New York City and lived in many different places in the city. But ultimately, when he passed away, he was living just over the border in Nassau County in Belmore. And he passed away in 1978, and this concentration camp jacket that he had kept until then sat in the back of the closet until it was discovered just a year and a half ago by a young woman who was shopping at that estate sale. They were selling all the items in the home. And she purchased it and brought it to us, and then we contacted the family, and they brought us all kinds of artifacts and other materials so that we could tell the story of this survivor's life. And it's a miraculous story in many ways. And the way we were able to tell the story, because initially we just had the jacket, and then the family brought us 2 boxes that they said, this was our father's, we don't know what's in it, but if you can organize it and figure that out, that would be wonderful for us, because we have no idea what happened to our father really during the Holocaust. He never spoke about it. But in these boxes are documents that we think relate to his Holocaust experience because they're in German or they're in Lithuanian, or we don't know what language they're in, we don't know what they're talking about. Can you help us? So all of the documents you see in the exhibit more or less came from these 2 boxes that the family gave to us. And what we discovered was that the documents he had kept mostly related to the survivor, Ben Perez's 20-year legal battle with the German government to get reparations. And this talk today is all about what reparations are, what they intend to do, what they do, and sometimes what they fail to do. And we're very lucky to have with us today a really remarkable scholar who bridges both the background with Holocaust and Genocide studies, which is so important, and as a former practicing attorney for many, many years, can help us understand these reparations. These are legal programs, and his applications were legal documents that he was trying to get compensation for the suffering. So to give a brief background, Mary is now, what is your title at the Rosenthal Institute?
I'm the Deputy Director of the Rosenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies.
She's the Deputy Director for the Rosenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies at the Graduate Center at CUNY. And the director himself, who is now in his 80s or 90s?
He's 94.
He's 94. He just retired last year at 93 from running this center. He is himself a Holocaust survivor and one of the leading scholars on the Holocaust in Hungary, and started the center and ran it in addition to his teaching in the political science department. And Mary has stepped in to help that center continue into the future. She is also an adjunct instructor, lecturer at Stockton University in New Jersey. It used to be Stockton College, it is no longer. And it's really a wonderful honor to have her here with us. And so without further ado, let me turn it over to Mary Maudsley.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Do I need to speak into the microphone? Okay. There we go. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to talk about reparations and Holocaust survivors' claims, but I'm not going to get into the legalese. I see that from chit-chatting before, there are several attorneys in the audience, and if you come expecting a legal analysis, you're going to be disappointed because you're going to be disappointed because I'm not going to be doing a legal analysis. There's plenty written which contain legal analyses, which I can refer you to if you're interested. But I'm going to talk more broadly about the process of and the different kinds of Holocaust-related claims by survivors. So I'm going to talk about Mr. Perez's claim in the context, in front of the mosaic of a much wider variety of Holocaust-related claims. Now, by now, I hope most or all of you have seen the exhibit. If you haven't seen the exhibit, I strongly suggest you see it as long as you're here. They have some very interesting documents, very lovely pictures, and it gives you a picture of a particular Holocaust survivor. Before I go further, can I ask, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, just checking. And if I forget and I get all absorbed in what I'm saying, somebody be sure to raise your hand and say louder, because I want you to be able to hear everything. Now, Ben Perez, who the exhibit, that's his seventh name. He went through a whole variety of names, as many other Holocaust survivors have done, because by the time they come to the United States, often they took on anglicized names. And Mr. Perez is the subject of this exhibit. It's his jacket that's the subject of the exhibit. And he and his mother survived not only 3 years in the ghetto, but a year in a concentration camp. The ghetto was in Lithuania, the concentration camp was in Germany, and when he came to the United States, he tried to get financial justice for himself and for his mother, who had shared the same experiences. His mother also had another son who was murdered during this process, and it was Ben Perez's idea, as you'll be able to see from the correspondence, that they should be compensated in some way for what happened to them. Now, the first question is, can justice or compensation even be possible in the face of the unprecedented murder, torture, death, enslavement, and massive theft committed in the name of the Third Reich during the Holocaust? True justice would be impossible. In the face of that truth, there are many individuals, groups, and corporations all over the world who have sought monetary compensation, the only real compensation available, for their losses of family members, for torture, for imprisonment in horrific conditions, and finally, for the gold and other wealth stolen by the Nazis with the collusion of the Swiss and their financial institutions. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Swiss later in my talk, but I'm going to talk about Ben Perez's claim against the backdrop of the vast series of different efforts to compensate Holocaust survivors. In 1952, Germany, this is 7 years after the end of the war, Germany passed the first reparations law, which provided pensions for Holocaust survivors. Mr. Perez's mother was receiving a pension under this law, and you can see a reference to that pension by her German attorney, which is out there in the exhibit. The claims portion of the exhibit here starts anew with a letter from Mr. Perez's German attorney in 1965, which advised him of a new law in Germany permitting claims for compensation for health damages. This would mean that both he and his mother could assert claims for the medical consequences of their imprisonment in the ghetto and for their incarceration in the concentration camp. According to the documents he submitted, which are out there in the exhibit, both he and his mother suffered from mental and emotional distress, the physical consequences of that distress, such as permanent digestive disorders and incapacitating severe headaches. Just reading the affidavits, the headaches that Mr. Perez describes are like none that any of us, God willing, have ever experienced or will experience. They prevented him from working. They prevented him from having any kind of a normal life, and he apparently almost despaired of ever being able to marry and have a normal family life. Happily, he met a nurse who understood his symptoms, who didn't think he was crazy. They fell in love, they married, they did have a family and a normal family life. Nonetheless, that family life was interfered with by his continuing psychological and physical consequences resulting from his treatment in both the ghetto and in the concentration camp. So when I read the underlying papers that he had to submit for his claim, there's a lot of correspondence about the kinds of forms that have to be submitted. You can't just write a letter and say, this is what happened to me, and here's a letter from a doctor that says it's all related. It's much more complicated than that, and much of the correspondence has to do with you filled out one form and now you have to fill out another form, and there's another form after that, and besides that, that form isn't good enough, so you need another form. There are lots of affidavits, and the gist of them all is that he suffered greatly physically and emotionally, and his mother suffered greatly physically and emotionally. After a significant amount of paperwork, he received an award of 4,175, if memory serves me, Deutschmarks, which was that was in 1975 Deutschmarks, and I looked and looked to see what I could find for the 1965 conversion rate, and I cannot tell you what that is in dollars. What I can tell you is whatever it is in dollars is not sufficient to compensate Mr. Perez for what he went through and for what his mother went through. This award was made possible only by German legislation. It could never have been achieved through an ordinary lawsuit. There are lots of, and for the lawyers in the audience, there are lots of problems. It was time barred by the statute of limitations. The German courts would have had no jurisdiction for what happened in Lithuania. There is a doctrine called sovereign immunity, which means that you cannot sue a nation for what it does as its own policy. So that's a gross oversimplification, but the gist of it is, if Mr. Perez had tried to start a lawsuit either in the United States or in Lithuania, or for that matter in Germany, he would have encountered only obstacles, legal obstacles. And so the fact that the Germans had passed a law allowing him to make this claim was the only way that he could get the compensation which he eventually did. Now, he could not have started a lawsuit in the United States because Germany was protected by what I just talked about, sovereign immunity, the idea that a state cannot be sued for actions that it takes as a nation. Only 10, count them 10, lawsuits were filed in the United States by survivors up to 1995. And for years, as Abe Foxman, I'm forgetting my PowerPoint here. Let me move to Abe Foxman. There we go. Abe Foxman said, and I have this up on the screen, the human tragedy was so tremendous, so enormous, so gargantuan, that nobody wanted to talk about material loss for fear that it would lessen the human tragedy. So the combination of the legal obstacles and the idea that somehow to seek money was either undignified or would reflect badly on the Holocaust survivors who had lost everything and now they wanted money, that was the idea that prevented a lot of survivors from trying to make claims to things which morally they clearly would have been entitled. Although Ben Perez was able to recover under the German statute and his mother was receiving the pension, many survivors who pursued other claims were unsuccessful. Now, I was speaking with the gentleman here in the front row before this program started, and he tells me that he pursued a claim as a survivor early on, and he was successful in getting, without even asking for it, German Social Security. So apparently the Germans were ready to make some kinds of reparations, but most survivors living in America were unaware of this or didn't know how to go about it or felt reluctant because they didn't want to seek money damages for what had happened to them. Survivors who tried to pursue claims against other nations for wrongs done during the Holocaust were frequently unsuccessful, at least in the early attempts. There we are. There was a lawsuit against Switzerland brought by Joseph Spring. Switzerland's highest court dismissed his lawsuit, even though the lower courts awarded him some money. because during World War II, he tried to flee to Switzerland, and the Swiss guards turned him over to the Nazis. Also, his cousin, two cousins, were turned over to the Nazis. They did not survive. They were deported to Auschwitz. Mr. Spring, who's pictured here, did survive, but he tried to get a judgment against Switzerland for not giving him refuge, for not giving him shelter, and eventually the courts, the highest court of the land, dismissed that lawsuit, and he said then, an apology would be enough if you stepped on somebody's toe when you're dancing, but it's a different matter when the active collaboration of the Swiss border guards sends people to their death. Justice, in my case, would mean recognition that a crime was committed against me. So he apparently got an apology, but that's it, not what he considered to be justice. Now, the question of Switzerland's reaction to the Jews seeking safe haven is a subject of some controversy, because on the one hand, Switzerland actually admitted 28,000 Jewish refugees during the war, which is more than were admitted to the United States. On the other hand, it turned away 30,000. Historians who are doing research contend that the number is much higher even than 30,000 who were turned away. And it was Switzerland, and my students are often surprised when I tell them this, it was Switzerland who insisted that German passports be stamped with a J for Jew, because they wanted to be sure to be able to turn away Jews who were trying to get admitted to Switzerland. That was not the Germans' idea. The yellow star was the Germans' idea. The J on the passport came at the insistence of the Swiss. The Swiss are not going to look too good here as we continue. In contrast, the government of West Germany decided to take responsibility for at least some claims arising out of the Holocaust. In order to help people pursue those claims, approximately 30 Jewish groups formed the Claims Conference. We'll come to that in a moment. The idea was that reparations money would be entrusted to the conference, which would consider the cases of each individual survivor and make an appropriate award. The awards would be based on need and some other criteria. However, this proved to be a highly contentious process. Survivors often sued the conference. Survivors claimed that the conference mismanaged funds and even that funds were embezzled. None of these suits was successful. There is a newspaper that is put out by a Jewish survivors group, and in the newspaper there are frequent, this is in America, there are frequent letters to the newspaper complaining again about the claims conference. And the idea is that the survivors' idea is that the claims conference people hold on to their money when they're entitled to get it, but they don't, the claims conference holds on to it so that they can get more management fees for managing the money. That's what some of the survivors believe. Now, I have not independently done research into that, so I can't tell you whether the claims are factually justified. All I can tell you is that they have not been successful. One survivor writes, "Why won't these SOBs give me my money?" Actually, this is a rhetorical question. I know why they won't. It's because they'd rather keep it. They figure that if I got along all this time without them paying what they owe me, well, then I can wait a while longer, and then eventually I will be gone, and that will be the end of the story, they probably say. They shouldn't bitch. They're lucky to be alive. That's the survivor's view of the claims conference. So I have to say that many survivors have received awards from the claims conference, but it continues to be highly contentious. And that's the only way that individuals can receive money unless they are successful in making a claim directly to the German government. But by and large, the only way to get a claim processed is through the claims conference, because Germany has made a what they call a global settlement to settle all claims against Germany. That money has been given to the claims conference, and it's up to the claims conference to distribute it to individuals. So by and large, that's how the individual claims are processed. And you can understand when people are frustrated, they blame the claims conference. Even today, the newspaper, the Jewish Survivor newspaper, believes, at least their readers believe, that the claims conference is holding on to the money so that the claims conference people can keep their jobs. Now, most of the famous cases that you've heard about are over the disposition of property, not individual funds. However, before I go on to that, I want to step up to the screen and read the different kinds of claims that the claims conference handles. I'm going to speak loud. Can you all hear me? Okay, because I don't think you can see this. One of the funds is for a lifetime pension for people who were incarcerated in concentration camps. This is based on needs and based on criteria which are set up by the German government. The Central and Eastern European Fund is a similar program which distributes payments to people who are in the former Soviet Union. The Hardship Fund is a one-time payment for Jewish victims who emigrated from the Soviet bloc and meet the eligibility criterion set by the German government. The Holocaust Victims Compensation Fund is a one-time payment for Jewish victims who fled from the Nazis. The program for former slave and forced laborers is a one-time payment for people compelled to work in a concentration camp or a ghetto. And the fund for victims of medical experiments and other injuries, that deadline is passed, so that's no longer functional. And it works with the Claims Commission to process claims for unpaid insurance policies. I'm going to come to the insurance policies in just a moment. But anyway, those are the basic programs of the claims conference that they administer. Now, I want to talk about the claims for property, because if you've ever seen anything or heard anything about Holocaust claims, it probably has related to property, not to personal injury. And these are where the Swiss come out looking very bad. The Swiss, we have to start with the Swiss bank accounts. The Swiss, when the Holocaust was just beginning, when Jews were just being really persecuted and feeling greatly in danger, the Swiss banks urged the Jews to deposit their money in numbered Swiss bank accounts. And many people, mostly Jews, but not entirely, put their money into Swiss bank accounts thinking it would be safe for them to retrieve if they survived the war. But when the survivors came to claim their money, the banks imposed every possible obstacle. For one thing, the neutral banks had transferred many Jewish assets to the German central bank on the theory that the Jews would not be coming back to claim them. So the Nazis had a very good working relationship with the Swiss banks. One survivor who's very famous, her name is Greta Beer. Her story was that her father had said to her before he was murdered, "Don't worry, I've provided for you. Commit this number to memory." So she committed it to memory. She went to the Swiss bank in question, recited the number, and they said, "Well, where's your father's death certificate? And besides that, we don't have any record of this. And besides that, even if you had proof of his death and proof of the account number, and even if we found the account number, you'd have to provide identification to show that you are your father's heir. And besides that, we don't have any records. So she went back to that bank more than 20 times, met with different people, and got a different version of the same story each time. So she testified in 1996 in front of the Senate Banking Committee. By that time, she had moved to the United States and was looking for help in claiming what she was sure was her father's bank account. And after the publicity surrounding that hearing, magically, the Swiss started to look for her account. They still couldn't find it originally, but they finally found it in Israel. How it got to Israel, nobody knows. But it was finally identified as her father's account, and she finally did actually collect her money. Yes. Many people did not, however. There's a man, a whistleblower. Let's have his picture. Oh, yes, here he is. Christopher Maudsley, who is an American, but he worked in a Swiss bank, and this is in the Maudsley, is that how you say it? Thank you. Christopher Maudsley, let me correct my pronunciation. He was working in a Swiss bank, and while he was working there, he noticed that they were shredding World War II bank records. He thought they weren't supposed to be doing this, so he went to a newspaper and tried to tell them about it, a Swiss newspaper. They didn't care, they weren't interested. So he found a reporter and told his story, and the reporter was interested. The bank was also interested, and the bank sued him for violating bank secrecy rules. And then he got death threats. So he moved away, he moved out of Switzerland, he retreated to the United States, and whatever happened to him, I cannot tell you, but I can tell you he's regarded as a hero because he reported what everybody suspected the Swiss were doing, which was to destroy the records so nobody could claim any accounts. Well, eventually, there was a class action lawsuit, and it resulted in a settlement in 1999, of $1.2 billion as part of a global settlement for all the claims against the Swiss and the banks. But the research done for that lawsuit, and I must tell you, I think the lawyers here are also the heroes. The research revealed a lot of the complicity of the Swiss with the Nazi regime. And there's a closely related kind of claim, and that's the insurance industry. The European insurance industry often, and there's an Italian insurance company and also insurance companies in Switzerland who were what they call the poor man's Swiss bank account. People would buy insurance, and if they didn't survive the Holocaust, then their heirs would get their insurance proceeds. That was the idea. But what happened was the same as with the bank accounts. People would turn up to claim the insurance proceeds, and the insurance company would say, "Where's your death certificate?" Right here in the policy, it says you have to have a death certificate. Well, as you can imagine, the Germans were not issuing death certificates, so most people could not claim their insurance proceeds. But one of the first lawsuits to arise out of that was by Max Buxbaum, that's Buxbaum, who was a Czech linen merchant, and he purchased 8 life insurance policies from an Italian insurance company, Association Generali. And Generali conducted business throughout Europe and the United States. And each of the policies who covered Mr. Buxbaum was made payable to one of his sons as a beneficiary. So Generali then refused to pay when the sons came to them and said, "We would like the insurance policy, our father was murdered." And they said, well, the German government, under the Third Reich, they had additional conditions for the Jews to ever collect on any insurance policy. And you can imagine how easy it was for a Jew to collect on an insurance policy in the Third Reich. So they said, we're bound by what the Germans did, and we're not going to give you the proceeds of the policy. So the Buchsbaum boys sued the Generali, Association Generali, and they won the lawsuit, and they got the proceeds of their 8 insurance policies. But many people were not that successful. They had no paperwork, they had no proof, often they had no insurance policy, just their parents' word that they had an insurance policy with X or Y insurance company. One of the things that the state of California tried to do was to say, okay, no insurance company can do business in California unless they pay for the Holocaust-related insurance claims. If you prove that you've done that, okay, you can do business in our state. Otherwise, forget it. Well, that went to court, of course, and the California law was held to be in conflict with the federal government's power, and so the state of California could not do that. However, this resulted in a lot of public pressure against insurance companies, and the insurance companies formed a conglomerate with one more set of letters, and that conglomerate entered into, again, a global settlement. Anyone who had an insurance claim could apply to this group, and they could then possibly get the insurance proceeds to which they're entitled. Now, in 1989, we're moving on from the Swiss here. In 1989, after the fall of communism, the German government was considered to be a successor to the Reich. So anybody who had claims against the Third Reich could make them against Germany. And as a result of that, a lot of new lawsuits were filed, including claims for slave labor. Most slave labor companies no longer existed. So who are you going to sue? A global settlement was reached with the German government. It was a pittance compared to the actual value of the services of slave laborers, but it was an acknowledgement that came with a public apology. Now, there was criticism of that. Norman Finkelstein, a name that some of you may know, he's in the category of Holocaust deniers, although he's not technically a denier. He wrote a book called The Holocaust Industry, and his theory is that extortion of Germany constitutes a Holocaust industry, and people who are making claims, especially groups who are making claims, are simply extorting the Germans. And even though Finkelstein himself is a survivor or child of survivors, nonetheless, he believes that people making financial claims against Germany are morally and politically wrong. Moving on from Finkelstein, whom I'd like to forget, but we can't. People are still reading his book. I want to talk about the looted art claims, which are probably what you are more likely to have heard about. I want to check where I am. We'll come to that in just a moment. The first lawsuit involving Nazi stolen art was filed in the 1960s. Erna Menzel brought suit in New York State to reclaim a painting by Chagall that was pillaged from her home in Brussels in 1941. The painting was left in the apartment when she and her husband fled from the Nazis. The painting was seized by the Center for National Socialist Ideological and Educational Research, a Nazi organization. The whereabouts of the painting was unknown until 1955, at which time the painting was purchased by a dealer named Pearls from a reputable Paris art gallery. That gallery sold the painting to a man named Liszt, and neither Pearls nor Liszt was aware that this was a stolen painting. So they were essentially innocent parties. However, the court found that the defendant's defenses of sovereign immunity was not going to bar the lawsuit because the theft was done not by a government, but by individual Nazis. And so, as a result, the court ordered the Chagall returned. So that was the first reported lawsuit about stolen art. But the more famous cases are, first of all, the landscape with smokestacks. This is a Degas landscape. What happened was a Jewish banker in the Netherlands sent the Degas to Paris for safekeeping. It was looted by the Nazis. Therefore, he could not trace it, he couldn't track it, and when he finally ultimately did, they refused to return it. That's the defendant List, the man who finally owned the painting. He refused to return it. He said, I bought it. I didn't know it was a stolen painting. I bought it from a gallery. They're a reputable gallery. I do not have to return it. And the problem was that although the original owner would have been entitled to it, there was a lot of legal wrangling about the real circumstances under which he had sent this painting to Paris. Had he actually sold it, or had he really sent it there for safekeeping? Big legal dispute, never resolved because it was settled. And when the case was settled, he was finally able to share ownership of that painting. It was a 50-50 division. I'm not sure who got to keep it when, but it was eventually settled before the lawsuit could be concluded. Now, the most famous is the painting of the woman in gold. That's the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer. Some of you may have seen the movie, The Woman in Gold. Anybody seen the movie? Great movie. Well, the movie is a slightly fictionalized version of what actually happened. What happened was Mr. Bloch-Bauer, Adele's husband, was a wealthy merchant, and he commissioned a number of paintings from the Austrian painter Gustav Klimt. Klimt is famous for his very sensual paintings, and some of them are done in elaborate gold leaf. This particular painting was supposed to be a gift for Adele Bloch-Bauer from her husband for an anniversary, but it came 5 years late because it took Klimt that long to complete all the gold leaf work on the painting. Eventually, it was completed, and Adele Bloch-Bauer, the subject of the painting, died in 1925. And in her will, she didn't own the painting. Her husband retained ownership of the painting. And in her will, she said, I hope you will give this painting and the other Klimts that we own to the National Austrian Gallery. I hope you'll do that. However, that did not happen. After the Nazis seized the paintings and after the war was over, the Austrian government said, well, this is ours, because she said in her will, I hope you, my husband, give this painting to the Austrian National Gallery. However, he did not do that. So litigation ensues. I won't bore you with the ins and outs of the litigation. The bottom line was eventually, well, I have to tell you one little detail. When she tried to sue in Austria, they said, fine, you can bring your suit here, no problem, but you have to deposit 10% of the value of the item that you're claiming. Well, since it was in the millions of dollars, the niece who was trying to claim the painting was not in a position to do that. Eventually, she brought suit in the United States and eventually agreed to have it heard by an Austrian arbitrator. The Austrian arbitrator awarded this painting to her, so she promptly sold it to, I forgot his first name, Lauder, Ronald Lauder. Okay, she sold it for $1 million and something. It now hangs in the Neue Gallery in Manhattan. If you're ever passing by the Neue Gallery, go and see it. It's beautiful. And that's probably the most famous case of the Nazi looted art that was settled ultimately by litigation. But all of this raises some philosophical questions, which are, is there any possibility of real justice that comes from financial compensation? And I think if you ask that question in a much narrower area, if, for example, you've ever been in an automobile accident or lost a member of your family through someone else's negligence, you may say to yourself, money is all I can get, but it won't bring back my loved one. It won't bring back my ability to live a normal life. So what's the point? And the point is, sometimes money can, quote, compensate for what's happened, but it's only financial compensation. It's not real compensation. So if you multiply that by the vast destruction of human life and theft of property in the Holocaust, I don't even want to say human life and theft of property in the same sentence, but this is a lecture and I have to make some sense. You can't compensate for the loss of human life. You can't compensate for people's incarceration in the horrific conditions of a concentration camp. You can't compensate for people forced to live in inhuman conditions in a ghetto. There's no such thing as compensation, but that's what it's called. And people who are entitled legally now to be compensated have made their claims through the claims conference or through direct claims to Germany or the other nations or the insurance companies or the banks, and they have been able to achieve, at least many of them, a financial award as a result of what happened in the Holocaust. And I phrase it that way because it's not really compensation. But I do want to read one conclusion. The Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, explained the impact of the various revelations being made today as a result of the misdeeds and financial misdealings during the Holocaust. And they said the Holocaust proved that the murder of the Jews and the annihilation of whole communities was not only an outlet for monstrous anti-Semitism, it was good business for the perpetrators. But it is precisely the willingness of the world's nations today to make material calculations and search for stolen property and return it that raises the question which in the past it was possible to ignore. And I think that's the consensus, that's the best conclusion we can reach about reparations or restitution or compensation. They're different legal definitions, but they all amount to the same thing. People who suffered loss of health, loss of family members, loss of life, and losses of their property which was stolen. The only way to remember that loss can be a monetary payment. I would like to conclude with one statement by Elie Wiesel, who pointed out that wealthy people were people who had art stolen from them, who had jewelry stolen from them, who had the possessions that they had worked all their lives to achieve, including their homes. They had those things stolen from them. But, he says, the children and the poor had possessions that were worth even more to them stolen. He said, "Who is going to compensate me for the book that I bought with my allowance when I was a child? Who is going to compensate me for the loss of my grandfather's tefillin? Who can do that?" And I think that's what I would like to conclude with and take questions. So, questions or comments? I'm open to commentary also. That's it?
Can I just ask, so we have a lot of students here that are going to be doing research on the exhibit. Can you give them any advice on how to use the reparations documents we have on display to learn more about the Holocaust and about Ben Perez's story?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would start by reading the catalog, which is an excellent description of the exhibit. And after you've read the catalog, and before you start looking at the exhibit, I would suggest you formulate a question. What is the thing you would most like to learn? And the answer can't be something like about the Holocaust. Make it a specific question. For example, what took Ben Perez so long to make his claim and to get it processed? Or, next question, did Ben Perez get an award that was separate from his mother, or did they make their claim together? That's kind of a legalistic question. You may want to ask yourself, what was Ben Perez's experience during the Holocaust, and how did he end up coming to America? Because we've heard, and I mentioned during the course of this lecture, many Jews were not admitted to America. Many Jews were too far down on the quota list to even possibly be saved, not only in America, but in most other nations of the world, with a few exceptions. So you may want to know, why couldn't Perez come to America before the Holocaust destroyed his brother and destroyed his health and the health of his mother? In other words, a specific question is a good way to start. And if you can't find the answers to your question in the exhibit, you can probably find clues as to where you can find the answer. I mean, the internet is a gift to us all for research if you stay away from the fake sites. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is an excellent website, and all the links there are reliable. You won't find yourself drifting into Holocaust deniers and wackos from that website. Also, the Jewish Virtual Library has excellent resources. I find the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is very easy to search. It has a search bar right in the front. It has a little magnifying glass right there at the beginning, and you type in, for example, reparations or compensation, and you'll get thousands of articles. So then you need to narrow it down. Anyway, that would be my suggestion. But start with a question, because otherwise you're just swimming in a wide sea and you'll never get to the shore. Okay, other questions? Yes, sir.
I wanted to know, from all the information you gathered about Ben Perez, how did you get all that information? Like, what documents did you get from those two boxes that the family gave you? How did you come to the conclusion and all the information that you gathered about what he went through and everything like that?
Good question, which I need to refer to Dan Lesham. Is he still in the room? The Kupferberg Institute, perhaps you can answer it, because it was the Kupferberg Institute that actually received that information and took charge of sorting it and collecting it and getting the German documents translated by the woman who is in the second to the last row, who actually did the translations. Can you tell us anything about that?
Harriet
family provided most of the documents. We did research and found other documents, but essentially, Dan and I visited the daughter of Ben Perez. Her name is Lori Zullo, and she had several boxes of artifacts and items that we gladly took and sorted through to sort of create the narrative and to understand better what was going on. So the family had possession. She didn't know everything she had in the boxes, but she did give them to us so that we could populate the exhibit with these wonderful artifacts.
That's as much of an answer as I can give you since I was not involved in that process. I only looked at the exhibit as a student of the exhibit. Yes?
It's my understanding that there are still many paintings out there in terms of stolen art that have not been returned.
Yes.
And can you give us some idea of what the status of that is? And I know that there are organizations, or maybe one organization, that is still working on the restoration of the stolen art.
Yeah, I do not know the specifics of the answer to your question. I do know that there are claims for a massive number of lost art. And when I say lost, I put lost in quotations. Missing art known to have last been known in the possession of the Nazis. But much of it is simply missing. And I'm sure that there is an organization trying to work through that, but I don't have any specific information about that. I do know it's still a vastly open question. Yes?
It's based on the bank. I would like to know, based on your research about the exhibit, like what was the reason that he had in the jacket from his family and never talk about it to his daughters, and nobody knew about it until his death?
Well, I can't speak for him specifically, but I do know that a lot of Holocaust survivors, they may have held on to specific items, but a lot of Holocaust survivors never spoke to their families about their experiences. At first, because they didn't think anybody would believe them, and also because the experiences were so horrific that they just couldn't bring themselves to speak about them at all. And my guess is, and this is just a guess, that I know that Mr. Perez kept his jacket in the back of a closet, never showed it to his family, never talked to his family about it. And my guess is that he kept it as a memento of the experience that he had lived through, but he didn't want to communicate anything about that experience to his family or to anybody else. Can anybody add anything to that who know about the exhibit? Yes.
When Ben Perez died, his children were 13 and 15, so they were rather young, and that may be part of that puzzle.
It could well be, yes. Now there are a lot of, if you are a reader, there are a lot of memoirs written by Holocaust survivors about their Holocaust experiences. And I just want to comment, because it flows a little bit from your question, I just want to comment on that. There are literally thousands of memoirs published now. My recommendation is you read the memoirs, for people who are doing research, read the memoirs written more closely after the war, because the memoirs written then are by people who, in spite of public apathy, wanted to tell something of their story. And their memories are probably more accurate closer to the time. There are a vast number of memoirs now, and in fact at the university where I teach, at Stockton University, there is a woman who helps our local survivors write their memoir so that they can be preserved for their family. But at this point, more than 70 years after the events, memories can be clouded, they can be confused, and when people tell them something, sometimes that's incorporated into their memory. So if you're looking for literature, the later memoirs are interesting and moving to read. But if you're looking for actual insight into immediate history, the memoirs that were written closer to the war, or diaries that were published after the war, or some memoirs were written even during the war, when people didn't know how things were going to come out and whether they were going to survive or not. And those are very much worth reading. So for students who are doing research, not just on reparations, but on the experiences of people during the Holocaust, I really recommend memoirs written closer to the time and also diaries. That's a little beyond the scope here, but that's my recommendation. Other questions? Comments? You don't have to ask a question, you can make a comment.
Are there any claims still being processed today?
My understanding is that most of the claims conference work is completed. That's a wishy-washy answer because I'm not certain whether there are some that are still being processed. I just know that most of it is completed. I used to look on the website for employment opportunities, and the conference was always looking for people fluent in 3 or 4 languages to work with survivors, and that was about 10 years ago. They stopped posting those advertisements about 3 years ago, and my understanding was that most of the work had been completed at that time, but I'm not certain whether there are any still pending. Yes, sir.
What's going to happen to the funds when there are no more claims to process?
They will probably be awarded to various groups, to Israel, to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. That's my guess, or to research organizations. There are other research organizations besides Yad Vashem, obviously, or the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Museum of Jewish Heritage, and there are obviously universities that have programs. There are some universities with, Clark University has a PhD program in Holocaust studies. That's my guess as to where it will go. But as long as there's a single survivor alive, I don't think the funds will be awarded. They'll be held until the last one is no longer with us. Yes?
Well, something you said caught my attention. You mentioned, well, if you avoid the fake sites, how do you do that?
Good question. The question was, how do you avoid the fake sites, the Holocaust denier sites disguised as real information, or as we now can call them, the alternative fact sites? What I tell my students is, number one, you look at what it tells you about the site. For example, every site should have a About Us link, and you click on the About Us link, and you see if it's a university or if it's an academic institution. You see if the writers are professors, and by that I mean real professors, not the I'm a professor professors. And you look at what other things the contributors have written. Have they written anything else in the field? And in other words, you have to dig below the site. Sometimes you can tell right away that this is a wacko site. Some are more cleverly disguised. There's one called the Institute for Historical Research. The Institute for Historical Research is a Holocaust denier site, but it sounds legitimate. Institute, right? But when you look at it, it's a Holocaust denier site, and you can tell that right away from the content. But the basic idea is it needs to be connected with an academic institution. Just a regular blog is not going to be reliably authoritative. Most professors who actually work in the field are not doing blogs, or if they're doing blogs, it's for discussions with their students, and they also have a presence online with a reputable institution. So basically, it has to be a site connected with a reputable institution, written by reputable people who have written other things in the field. That's the beginning. That's not the end, because there are always more complicated ways to deceive the reader. But that's the place to start. And also, any links from the USHMM website, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, those are all reputable links. They're very security conscious, and they know what they're doing. Other websites might not be as reliable. You need to look at the source of the information. Does that answer your question? It's only a partial answer.
It gives us a strategy.
Yeah, it's a starting point. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Even though there may not be a direct answer, based on your research, what happened to all that money when they destroyed all the bank account numbers? Did it go back to the German government? Does the Swiss bank have it, or there's no evidence of anything?
I do not know the answer, except to tell you that the settlements, the quote global settlements, are in the billions of dollars. And so I don't know whether they raised that money from the quote dormant end quote bank accounts, or whether it came from the Swiss government and the German government and the Italian government. I do not know what the source of those funds are. I do know, however, that if you have a claim on a bank account or an insurance policy, you go to the global fund, not to the individual bank or institution. Other questions or comments? Yes, go ahead.
Good evening, I'm Hannah Liebman. Some of you know me because I've been speaking to you. What I would like to say is that you're absolutely right. No amount of money can make good or compensate us for what we experienced. Not as far as the time we were in a concentration camp and 5 years in limbo in Switzerland as refugees, and we were lucky, very lucky to get in. My husband was first ejected, and he ignored it and made it. But also the time we lost being sick. We spent 2 years, my husband and I both spent 2 years in a sanatorium because of our experience in France in the concentration camp. This time we spent in the hospital, we had to put our daughter in a foster home. So there is no money in the world that will make up for the time we lost, for the loss of our parents and other relatives. No way.
I can imagine that, yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Marissa Hollywood. I'm the assistant director here. Dr. Lesham sends his regards. He has 2 small, sick children at home, so he had to take off. But thank you so much, Mary, for that presentation. We're grateful to have you here. And I'd like to invite you all, there's still some refreshments. Please take a look in the exhibition.
Invite them to the writing and reflection.
Yes. So please take a look at the exhibition, really focus on that reparations area. And at the very end of the hallway, there's a section for reflection. So if you have any comments about tonight's presentation or anything that you're thinking about when you view the exhibition, please feel free to write it out on a Post-it and become part of the exhibition. Thank you.